The mistakes that made Hitler's empire collapse. Adolf Hitler's Third Reich rose with astonishing speed, conquering much of Europe between 1939 and 1941. At its height, Nazi Germany controlled territory stretching from France to the outskirts of Moscow. Yet within just a few years, this seemingly unstoppable empire collapsed completely. The fall of Hitler's empire was not inevitable from the beginning. It was accelerated by a series of strategic, political, military, and ideological mistakes that ultimately proved fatal. This article examines the key mistakes that led to the collapse of Hitler's empire. 1. Over-ambition and the pursuit of total war. One of Hitler's greatest mistakes was overexpansion. Rather than consolidating power over conquered territories, Hitler continually pushed for more land, more enemies, and more wars. Germany invaded Poland, 1939, then quickly turned west toward France and the Low Countries, 1940. Instead of stopping after securing Western Europe, Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa against the Soviet Union in 1941. At the same time, Germany remained at war with Britain and soon also faced the United States. Germany lacked the resources, manpower, and industrial capacity to fight a global, multi-front war against such powerful enemies simultaneously. Result: Germany became overstretched, unable to defend all fronts effectively. 2. The invasion of the Soviet Union, Operation Barbarossa. The invasion of the Soviet Union was arguably Hitler's single most catastrophic decision. Key errors: underestimating Soviet strength. Hitler believed the USSR would collapse within months. Ignoring logistics, German supply lines were stretched across vast distances with poor infrastructure. Winter unpreparedness. German troops were not equipped for Russia's brutal winter. Divided objectives. Hitler constantly changed priorities between Moscow, Leningrad, and Stalingrad. The failure to defeat the Soviet Union quickly led to a war of attrition, a type of war Germany could not win. Result: massive German casualties and the loss of strategic momentum. 3. Declaring war on the United States. After Japan attacked Pearl Harbor in December 1941, Hitler voluntarily declared war on the United States, a decision not required by Germany's alliance with Japan. This was a disastrous miscalculation. The U.S. had enormous industrial and economic power. American factories produced tanks, planes, ships, and weapons at a scale Germany could not match. The U.S. supplied Britain and the Soviet Union through Lend-Lease programs. Result: Germany now faced an enemy with virtually unlimited resources. 4. Hitler's micromanagement and military interference. As the war progressed, Hitler increasingly interfered in military decisions, often overriding experienced generals. Examples: ordering troops to fight to the last man instead of allowing strategic retreats. Refusing to allow the Sixth Army to withdraw from Stalingrad, leading to its destruction. Making decisions based on ideology and pride rather than military reality. Hitler's rigid command style prevented flexibility and adaptation on the battlefield. Result: entire German armies were encircled and destroyed unnecessarily. 5. Ideology over strategy. Nazi ideology significantly weakened Germany's war effort. Brutal occupation policies turned local populations into resistance fighters. Racial policies alienated potential allies, especially in Eastern Europe. The Holocaust diverted manpower, transportation, and resources away from the war effort. Instead of focusing purely on military victory, Hitler prioritized racial extermination and ideological goals. Result: widespread resistance and wasted resources during a total war. 6. Failure to defeat. Britain-Germany never successfully neutralized Britain. The Battle of Britain, 1940, was Germany's first major defeat. The Luftwaffe failed to gain air superiority. Britain became a permanent base for Allied planning and later the D-Day invasion. By abandoning the invasion of Britain and turning east, Hitler left a powerful enemy undefeated. Result: a constant Western threat that eventually opened a second front. 7. Economic and industrial mismanagement. Germany's economy was not fully mobilized for war until late in the conflict. Civilian production continued longer than necessary. Competing Nazi agencies created inefficiency and chaos. Allied bombing campaigns severely damaged German industry. In contrast, the Allies, especially the US, optimized mass production early. Result: Germany was outproduced in tanks, aircraft, fuel, and ammunition. 8. The loss of key battles. Several critical defeats sealed the fate of Hitler's empire. Stalingrad, 1942-43, the turning point on the Eastern Front. El Alamein, 1942, halted German expansion in North Africa. D-Day, 1944, opened a decisive Western Front. Battle of Berlin, 1945, final collapse of the Third Reich. Each defeat reduced Germany's ability to recover. 9. Lack of reliable allies. Germany's allies were militarily weaker and poorly coordinated. Italy was ineffective and often required German support. Japan fought its own war and provided little direct help to Germany. Axis powers lacked unified command and strategic cooperation. Result: Germany bore the brunt of the war alone. Conclusion: Hitler's empire collapsed not because Germany lacked strength, but because its leadership made fatal strategic and ideological mistakes. Overexpansion, underestimating enemies, fighting on multiple fronts, prioritizing ideology over strategy, and Hitler's personal interference all contributed to the downfall of the Third Reich. The collapse of Nazi Germany serves as a powerful historical lesson. Military power without strategic wisdom, flexibility, and moral restraint ultimately leads to destruction. Part 2. Strategic breakdown, resistance, and final defeat. While early mistakes weakened Nazi Germany, the later stages of the war exposed fatal structural flaws that ensured total collapse. As Allied pressure increased, Hitler's decisions became more desperate, irrational, and detached from reality. 10. Underestimating Allied coordination and strategy. Hitler believed the Allied powers, Britain, the Soviet Union, and the United States, would fail to cooperate effectively due to ideological differences. This assumption proved disastrously wrong. Allied advantages: coordinated military planning across continents, shared intelligence, resources, and technology. Unified command structures, especially after 1943. Major conferences such as Tehran, Yalta, and Potsdam ensured synchronized offensives that overwhelmed German defenses. Result: Germany faced simultaneous, coordinated attacks it could not counter. 11. The rise of resistance movements. Nazi brutality in occupied territories fueled widespread resistance across Europe. French, Polish, Yugoslav, Greek, and Soviet partisan movements sabotaged railways and supply lines. German forces were forced to divert troops from front lines to maintain control. Executions and reprisals only strengthened resistance resolve. Instead of stabilizing its empire, Germany ruled through terror, creating enemies everywhere. Result: constant internal disruption weakened German military effectiveness. 12. Strategic bombing and the destruction of German infrastructure. The Allied bombing campaign devastated Germany's industrial heartland. Key effects: destruction of factories, rail networks, and oil refineries. Severe fuel shortages crippled tanks and aircraft. Civilian morale collapsed under constant bombardment. Although Germany developed advanced weapons, they lacked fuel, pilots, and production capacity to be decisive. Result: Germany's war machine slowly ground to a halt. 13. Reliance on wonder weapons, Wunderwaffen. As defeat loomed, Hitler placed false hope in advanced technology. Examples include V-1 and V-2 rockets, jet-powered aircraft, like the Me-262, experimental tanks, and super-heavy weapons. While technologically impressive, these weapons were introduced too late, too expensive, poorly coordinated into overall strategy. Result: resources were wasted instead of reinforcing proven military systems. 14. Collapse of morale and leadership. By 1944-45, Germany suffered a profound crisis of morale. Soldiers were exhausted and outnumbered, civilians faced hunger, bombing, and displacement. Officers lost faith in Hitler's leadership. Several assassination attempts, including the July 20, 1944 plot, revealed internal opposition within Germany itself. Result, the regime was collapsing from within as well as from external pressure. 15. The failure of the Ardennes offensive, Battle of the Bulge. In late 1944, Hitler launched a final major offensive in the West. Why it failed: lack of fuel and supplies, overconfidence in surprise tactics. Strong Allied air power once weather cleared, the offensive temporarily delayed Allied advances, but drained Germany's last reserves. Result: after the failure, Germany had no ability to stop the Allied advance. 16. The Soviet advance in the fall of Berlin. By 1945, the Red Army was advancing rapidly from the east. German cities fell one by one. Civilian refugees flooded westward. Berlin was encircled in April 1945. Hitler refused evacuation or negotiation and remained in his bunker, issuing orders to non-existent armies. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler committed suicide. Result: Germany surrendered unconditionally on May 7, 1945. Conclusion: why Hitler's empire was doomed. Hitler's empire collapsed because it was built on aggression, ideology, and absolute control, rather than sustainable strategy and cooperation. Core reasons for collapse: fighting too many enemies at once, ignoring economic realities, prioritizing ideology over humanity, centralizing power in one unstable leader, ruling through terror instead of legitimacy. The Third Reich's downfall stands as a warning in history. Empires founded on hatred and arrogance ultimately destroy themselves. Part 3. Lessons, Legacy, and Historical Impact. The collapse of Hitler's empire did not end with military defeat alone. Its consequences reshaped global politics, warfare, morality, and international relations for decades. Understanding why Nazi Germany failed helps explain not only the past, but also the dangers of similar patterns in the future. 17. Failure to adapt to changing warfare. World War II was a rapidly evolving conflict, but Nazi Germany failed to adapt effectively in its later stages. Early successes relied on blitzkrieg tactics, which emphasized speed and surprise. Once enemies adapted, Germany struggled to change its approach. The Allies improved air superiority, combined arms warfare, and logistics faster than Germany. Hitler clung to outdated strategies and refused to acknowledge changing realities. Result: Germany fell behind in strategic innovation despite technological talent. 18. Centralization of power in one leader. Hitler's empire depended almost entirely on one man's judgment. No meaningful checks on Hitler's authority existed. Dissenting opinions were punished or ignored. Decision-making slowed as fear replaced honest debate. When Hitler's judgment deteriorated, the entire state suffered. Result: the system collapsed once its leader became isolated and irrational. 19. Moral collapse and crimes against humanity. The Third Reich's moral bankruptcy played a direct role in its destruction. Genocide and mass murder alienated the world. War crimes hardened Allied resolve to demand unconditional surrender. Germany lost any chance of negotiation or compromise. The Holocaust and other atrocities ensured that Nazi Germany would be destroyed, not defeated diplomatically. Result: total annihilation became the Allies' only acceptable outcome. 20. Post-war consequences of Hitler's mistakes. The defeat of Nazi Germany reshaped the world. Germany was divided into East and West. Europe lay devastated, leading to reconstruction through the Marshall Plan. The United Nations was formed to prevent future global conflicts. The Cold War emerged between former allies. Hitler's actions directly contributed to the loss of German sovereignty and influence for decades. 21. Lessons for modern leadership and states. The fall of Hitler's empire offers timeless lessons. Political lessons. Absolute power leads to catastrophic decisions. Ideology must never replace rational governance. Military lessons. Overextension destroys even powerful armies. Logistics and economy matter as much as battlefield victories. Fighting multiple major powers simultaneously is unsustainable. Moral lessons: regimes built on hatred and oppression cannot endure. Crimes against humanity guarantee global opposition. 22. Why the Third Reich collapsed. So completely unlike many defeated empires, Nazi Germany collapsed totally. Its political system disintegrated. Its ideology was rejected worldwide. Its leadership was eliminated. Its territory was occupied. This total collapse occurred because the empire was not built to survive without war and conquest. Result, when expansion stopped, the system imploded. Final conclusion, Hitler's empire collapsed not merely because it lost battles, but because it was founded on fundamental mistakes: arrogance over realism, ideology over humanity, control over cooperation, expansion over stability. The Third Reich stands as one of history's clearest examples of how unchecked ambition, cruelty, and poor leadership can destroy even the most powerful state. History's warning is clear. Empires built on fear may rise quickly, but they fall violently and completely. Part 4. Myths, Miscalculations, and Overlooked Factors. Beyond obvious military defeats, several less discussed mistakes and misconceptions accelerated the collapse of Hitler's empire. These hidden weaknesses reveal why the Third Reich was far more fragile than it appeared. 23. The myth of German military superiority. A common myth is that Nazi Germany was militarily superior, but simply overwhelmed by numbers. In reality, this belief is misleading. German weapons were often over-engineered and difficult to mass-produce. Allied equipment prioritized reliability and quantity. German forces lacked consistent fuel, spare parts, and replacements. Germany won early victories through surprise, not superiority. Result, once the element of surprise disappeared, German weaknesses were exposed. 24. Racism as a strategic weakness. Nazi racial ideology directly harmed Germany's war effort. Slavic populations were treated as subhuman instead of potential allies. Millions who could have fought against Stalin joined Soviet resistance instead. Jewish scientists, doctors, and intellectuals were murdered or driven into exile. Many later helped the Allies. Germany effectively destroyed its own human capital. Plans were misinterpreted or ignored. Hitler trusted personal intuition over professional analysis. Meanwhile, the Allies cracked German codes, for example, Enigma, and used deception operations like Operation Fortitude. Result? Germany fought blind, while its enemies saw clearly. 26. Economic warfare and resource shortages. Germany entered the war without secure access to vital resources. Key shortages: oil, rubber, aluminum, food. Attempts to seize resources, Caucasus oil fields, North Africa, failed. Allied naval blockades and bombing further strangled the economy. Result: tanks, aircraft, and vehicles became useless without fuel. 27. The failure of Nazi diplomacy. Hitler relied on force rather than diplomacy. Neutral countries were threatened instead of persuaded. Potential partners were alienated by Nazi aggression. Germany failed to build a durable international coalition. In contrast, the Allies united democracies, empires, and ideologically opposed states against a common enemy. Result: Germany stood isolated against the world. 28. The cult of personality and fear-based governance. Nazi Germany functioned as a cult centered on Hitler. Officials competed to guess Hitler's wishes instead of solving problems. Fear replaced competence in leadership positions. Honest feedback vanished. This created chaos, inefficiency, and catastrophic decision-making. Result: the state became incapable of self-correction. 29. What if Hitler had chosen differently? Historians often ask hypothetical questions. What if Germany had not invaded the Soviet Union? What if Hitler had not declared war on the US? What if military professionals had retained control? Even in these scenarios, long-term survival remains unlikely due to ideological extremism and economic limitations. But collapse might have been delayed. Key insight: Hitler's ideology made moderation impossible. 30. Why collapse was ultimately inevitable. By its nature, the Third Reich required constant expansion, permanent enemies, absolute obedience, continuous war. Once resistance formed and expansion stalled, the system could not adapt. Result: Collapse was not just a defeat, it was systemic failure. Closing reflection. Hitler's empire did not collapse overnight. It destroyed itself step by step through arrogance, hatred, poor leadership, and refusal to accept reality. The most dangerous mistake was not a single battle or invasion. It was the belief that violence, fear, and ideology could replace wisdom, cooperation, and humanity. Part 5. Timeline of Decline and Final Synthesis, 1933 to 1945. This section presents a chronological breakdown of how Hitler's mistakes accumulated over time and led to the complete destruction of the Third Reich. 31. Timeline of Key Mistakes, 1933 to 1945, 1933 to 1938. Foundations of Future Failure. Hitler establishes a dictatorship based on fear and ideology. Political opponents, intellectuals, and minorities are eliminated or exiled. The economy becomes militarized but not sustainably planned. Early success hides deep structural weaknesses. Mistake: building a state driven by ideology rather than stable institutions. 1939. The invasion of Poland. Germany launches World War II. Britain and France declare war. Germany underestimates international response. Mistake: assuming quick wars without global consequences. 1940. Victory in the West, strategic confusion. France is defeated rapidly. Britain survives the Battle of Britain. Hitler abandons plans to invade Britain. Mistake: leaving a major enemy undefeated while opening new fronts. 1941. The turning point invasion of the Soviet Union. Operation Barbarossa. Declaration of war on the United States. Germany now fights 3 global powers simultaneously. Mistake: overconfidence and catastrophic overexpansion. 1942 to 1943. Momentum shifts defeat at Stalingrad. Loss in North Africa. German casualties reach millions. Mistake: refusing strategic retreats and ignoring reality. 1944. The beginning of the end. D-Day invasion opens Western Front. Failed July 20th assassination attempt reveals internal collapse. Battle of the Bulge drains final reserves. Mistake: gambling remaining strength on desperate offensives. 1945. Total collapse. Soviet forces enter Berlin. Hitler commits suicide. Germany surrenders unconditionally. Final outcome: complete military, political, and moral defeat. 32. Why Hitler could not save his empire. By the end, no decision could reverse Germany's fate because industry was destroyed, allies were overwhelming, morale was shattered, leadership was dysfunctional. Even peace negotiations were impossible due to Nazi crimes. 33. Core mistakes summarized. Strategic mistakes: fighting multiple major powers, ignoring logistics and resources, rejecting defensive warfare. Political mistakes: centralizing power in one man, eliminating competent opposition, governing through fear. Ideological mistakes: racism and genocide, prioritizing ideology over strategy, dehumanizing conquered populations. 34. Exam-ready conclusion, short version. Hitler's empire collapsed because it was built on aggression, extremism, and absolute control. Early victories created